The temporal lobe occupies the bottom middle part of the cortex, right behind the temples. It receives raw sensory information, including sound and speech, and is responsible for visual memory and emotional response. One of the principal components of the temporal lobe is the limbic system, located in the inner part of the lobe. The limbic system is composed of the olfactory cortex, amygdala, and hippocampus. The olfactory cortex processes smelling. Olfactory receptors in the roof of the nasal cavity are ciliated epithelial cells. These receptors have axons that pass through the cribriform plate and synapses on the dendrites of cells located in the olfactory bulb called mitral cells. Axons of these mitral cells travel back to the olfactory cortex. The amygdala transmits learned sensory stimulus to an adaptive response. It receives highly processed sensory input from the auditory and visual cortex and transmits this information into an adaptive response. This is output to the hypothalamus, which is responsible for releasing hormones and regulating body temperature. One of the most important parts of not only the limbic system, but the temporal lobe as a whole, is the hippocampus. There are two principal types of memory, working memory and declarative memory. Declarative memory can be further subdivided into semantic, episodic, and procedural memory. In a famous medical case where the majority of a patient's hippocampus was removed, the patient was unable to form new memories but remembered all his pre-surgery memories. This showed that the hippocampus is responsible for declarative memory. In the hippocampus structure, there is the hippocampus, hippocampal gyrus, and the dentate gyrus, the strip of gray matter in between the two. The hippocampal gyrus contains the entorhinal cortex and the subiculum, and is involved in the flow of information. Another important part of the temporal lobe is the auditory cortex. Responsible for processing auditory information, it's located roughly at the upper sides of the temporal lobes. It can be divided into the core, the belt, and the parabelt. Besides receiving input from the ears via lower parts of the auditory system, it also transmits signals back to these areas and is interconnected with other parts of the cerebral cortex. Neurons in the auditory cortex are organized according to the frequency of sound to which they respond best. The ones at the front end of the auditory cortex respond best to low frequencies. Neurons at the other respond best to high frequencies. Individual cells are excited by sounds at specific frequencies. The auditory cortex is also involved in tasks such as identifying and segregating auditory objects, and identifying the location of a sound in space. In the hearing process, multiple sounds are transduced simultaneously. The role of the auditory system is to decide which components from the sound link. This is how people are able to recognize distinct sounds.